Hi, I'm Kevin Keller, the Pragmatic Statistician. In this episode of Street Stats, we're going to explore the difference between models for explanation and models for prediction. We're just going to use regression, but this concept holds true for all modeling techniques. Now, there was a very famous statistician by the name of George Box, and he said the following: all models are wrong, but some are useful. We laugh at statisticians for being wishy-washy. I'm 95% of the confident, and that gives me an out for being wrong 5% of the time. But there is incredible truth in what he said. All models are wrong, but some are useful. When you learned linear regression, you were taught about a concept called R squared. I happened to learn it in my freshman year of college. We were doing a unit operations lab, and we had to do a calibration experiment between two gauges. We were taught higher R squared is better. Now, that's actually not true in the real world. What is true is R squared represents the variability explained by applying the model. It doesn't mean that the model is correct, and it certainly does not mean the model is useful. Now, let's go back to what old George said. We need a useful model. Now, we joke about the saying correlation does not mean causation. Then we quickly forget about that phrase because we want a higher R squared. Now, when I was at Anheuser-Busch InBev, I used this example when I was teaching classes in the United States. At that time, the highest selling beer brand was Bud Light, an AB InBev brand. Its major competitor was Coors Light. When I was in corporate sales creating business models, I created this simple example to use to illustrate the difference between explanatory models and predictive models. For this session, I've mocked up data to illustrate what was happening. Note, this is not real data, but it paints a picture. So we're going to go to Engine Room, and I'm going to show you some data here real quick. So we have a total of 104 weeks, so that's 2 years worth of information. And we have a competitor price, and we have our price versus sales. So we should always do some scatter plots. That's a good practice. So we're going to do a scatter plot of our price versus the sales, and we'll see what that looks like. So we can see that it's negatively correlated, which we would expect as price increases, sales would go down. We can do the same thing with our competitor price and the sales. And let's see what happens. And we can see as our competitor price also goes up, sales decreases. So both of those make perfect sense. While we're at this, is there a correlation between our price and our competitor's price? Do we uh, play in tandem? Let's see if that's true. And sure enough, as our price is going up, our competitor's price is going up. And so that's probably a realistic situation in the world, right? That all makes sense. So now, turns out that our Bud Light, our pricing and our competitors' pricing are correlated. It might be cause and effect, but it probably is not direct cause and effect. And maybe another time we'll dive into that subtlety. But for today, we're going to recognize that they are correlated. Now, you want to create a model that explains market share or sales. So you dump both of these variables into the model. So we're going to do that in Engine Room. We'll go to Analyze Regression, Multiple Regression, because we learned in college we could do this. So we're going to dump our price, and we'll dump our competitor's price, and we'll dump in sales, and we generate a regression, and here we go. And we see that we can get a regression. And so we see sales is equal to a y-intercept minus a little bit of our price and a lot of our competitor's price. And we go, oh my gosh, it's mainly our competitor that has things to do with it. And that's the wrong conclusion, because if I were king, I'd put VIF at the top. Back in multiple regression, you learned if the VIF was greater than 5, then we had issues. And it said you've got to choose which variable you want to choose. You can't use both. So that's, oh, okay, we'll do that. So let's go do regression. We'll do a simple linear regression. And we will take our competitor price versus sales, and we'll generate a regression on that. And so we see the correlation coefficient is negative 0.71 and R squared of 50%. Okay, let's remember that, 50%. And now we will do a regression on our price versus sales. And I used to do this example with all of my classes. And so now we can see that the correlation's not quite 0.71, it's only negative 0.67, and an R squared of, we'll call it 46% to be generous, so a little over 45%. So the question at hand is, which model do we use? Now, my classes universally would all say Coors Light. Why? Because it has a higher R squared. And that answer is wrong, 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 wrong. Why is the answer wrong? Let's go back to George Box. All models are wrong. Therefore, any choice is wrong, but some are useful. Now, it might be true that our competitor price does a better job of explaining what has happened in the past, but I can't use it for prediction. Why? Because I don't know what the competitor is going to do next week until they do it. So I don't have a predictive model. But if I do use a variable I understand, I can develop a predictive model. Therefore, if my pricing is correlated and it's cause and effect, then I should choose my pricing because I am in control of what my price will be. I can predict within a given interval how much my share or sales will move. Now, what I've discovered over the past few decades is that the bulk of senior management all have their MBAs, and part of that process is taking a class on statistics. Now, hey, I taught MBAs for 17 years at night school. In a 3-hour class the week before finals, so you can imagine how well that material sunk in, we cover multiple linear regression. They learn that they can dump a bunch of variables into the model and predict a Y. Now, that's only true if you have meaningful predictors, but more importantly, time has nothing to do with the model. Now, any business model has time as a function in it, whether you think it does or not. Think about your own business. How disruptive was COVID on your business model? What effects did it have permanently on your business model? Therefore, you can't go back prior to 2020 and use any of that data. The world has changed. Maybe you had a business reorganization. Now you are doing work differently than you did in the past. And the list of these exceptions goes on and on. What is true today is not true tomorrow. Therefore, all business models are wrong, always. But they can be useful. They can give you slopes, indicators of trends that will result. For example, in sales, we talk about products being elastic or inelastic. It's a slope. Bottom line, don't choose the model with the highest R squared. Choose the model that is useful for your business. Be careful out there. The streets are messy, and so is data. But remember, there is always a way.